Video that purportedly there shows Russian forces launching thermobaric weapons, the so-called vacuum bombs that we have told you about in weeks previous against Ukrainian forces. Now, this is from a social feed media by a Turkish news outlet that specializes in defense coverage. The UK Defense Ministry accuses Russian forces of using the controversial weapons, which trigger a massive fireball and powerful blast that literally sucks oxygen out of the area where it detonates. Here's another concerning development. Russia's Ministry of Defense claiming a hypersonic missile strike was used on a Ukrainian fuel depot. There's no video of that airstrike, but hypersonic missiles travel as much as 5 times the speed of sound, far faster than other supersonic missiles. Hypersonic missiles can fly at lower trajectories as well, which makes them harder for air defense systems to knock them down. So with that as a starting point, I want to introduce a special guest this morning. Andrew Weber is with me. He's a senior fellow at the Council on Strategic Risks. He is the former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological Programs. He is in Washington this morning, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to our program, Mr. Weber. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Heather.
The pictures that we were just looking at, again, going back to a Turkish news outlet posting those thermobaric weapons and then the reports of a hypersonic missile. Can you just weigh in on those, just so we understand the seriousness of those being employed at this point in this war?
Well, as Russia has pretty much reached a stalemate in the military conflict, they're increasingly turning to brutal, indiscriminate weapons aimed at civilian targets, and the fuel air explosives, the so-called vacuum bombs, could be used with devastating effect against apartment buildings and other civilian soft targets.
So how would that work? I mean, not to get into anything too gruesome, if you don't mind, but I mentioned that it as you said, a vacuum bomb, it sucks the oxygen out of the area. So if we're to hit a civilian target, that's how it would then work?
Well, it also ignites, and so it's like a giant, almost like a giant fireball. They're horrible, horrible weapons, and Russia isn't doing very well militarily. The army, the vaunted army, is losing reportedly about 1,000 soldiers a day. So as they become increasingly desperate, they're going after soft targets like schools and hospitals and residential buildings. It's truly horrific, and these are definitely in the class of war crimes.
Which is under investigation, of course, at the International Court of Criminal Court level. So because of that situation, the stalemate, the stall that you referred to, and we've heard that as well from U.S. intelligence, from British intelligence, the fact that things are not happening according to what they thought was Russia's initial plan. How could that affect Russia's decision not just to go to thermobaric weapons or this hypersonic missile? What about other weapons of mass destruction, things like chemical, biological weapons, sir?
Well, that's my biggest worry as Putin gets cornered, the war is going poorly, and he gets more desperate. He may indeed turn possibly to nuclear weapons, although I think it's much more likely that he would use chemical or biological weapons, and indeed our intelligence indicates that he is planning to do so. We've been revealing this intelligence to try to preempt that, but we'll see in the coming days and weeks if he does turn to these horrible, horrible weapons in the way that the Assad regime in Syria has.
So coming days and weeks, so in the near term. And when you say these weapons, what type of chemical weapons in particular? What do we know about the Russian arsenal?
Well, Russia has a whole range of chemical weapons depending on how they use them and the desired effects. We know they have fourth-generation nerve agents, like the Novichok agents that were used in peacetime in Salisbury, England. I mean, that was the smoking gun that they have in the illegal covert chemical weapons program. But they could use sarin gas or VX or even incapacitants, possibly even opioids like fentanyl analogs that they used in the Moscow theater siege in 2002.
So it's all there and available to them. And then how could they use these particular types of weapons?
Well, I think they would deliver them covertly by GRU intelligence operatives, perhaps with spray tanks. But they could also, as Syria has done, drop them in dumb bombs. They could even use industrial chemicals like chlorine. These are weapons of terror that kill indiscriminately, and they're banned for a good reason. Ever since their use in World War I, they've been banned. They weren't used widely in World War II, and we have an international convention that all countries are supposed to declare and eliminate their stockpiles. But Russia has been in violation, obviously.
You know, Mr. Weber, this is your area of expertise, and I have to say it's pretty unsettling to listen to what you're talking about. What do you think is the likelihood of this type of attack?
Well, I think it's likely. We can deter it by continuing to reveal our exquisite intelligence in advance, and I think we need to beef up Ukrainian military and civilian defense against these weapons. There are antidotes. We need to have them pre-positioned. We need to have detection systems pre-positioned. And we also need to deter biological weapons attacks, which are different. They're more slow acting. They have an incubation period. But many of them can be treated with antibiotics and other medical countermeasures. So
what we have heard from Russia just a matter of days ago is the allegation that it is, in fact, the United States that's funding work in biological laboratories within Ukraine. That has been debunked or dismissed by the United States, but is there any validity to that claim, anything at all that would suggest that the U.S. is active in this area?
Absolutely zero. President Nixon outlawed the U.S. Biological Weapons Convention in 1969, and ever since Russia, the Soviet Union and then Russia have violated the Biological Weapons Convention. These are outrageous lies that have been propagated first by a KGB-style disinformation campaign with press plants, using cooperative Bulgarian journalists, for example. But now they're up to the official level. Even in the joint statement of President Xi and President Putin accused the United States of surrounding their countries with biological weapons laboratories. It's an outright lie, and indeed it's Russia that has secret military laboratories that have never been visited by international visitors or inspectors, and they continue to violate the Biological Weapons Convention as well as the Chemical Weapons Convention.
And what we've heard from people like the Secretary of State in the United States is by raising this specter of a U.S. biological weapons program within Ukraine, they signaled that as a potential false flag, indicating that's exactly what Russia might be intending itself to do, as you suggest, potentially in the near term. If Russia should ever go down the path of biological and chemical weapons, Mr. Weber, how far a step is it then to nuclear?
Well, it would be a huge step to go to nuclear, but should they use either chemical or biological weapons, as President Biden has said, they will face severe consequences. The international community will be absolutely disgusted by such an atrocious act. And so we need to keep signaling that they won't get away with it, that we will deter and respond forcefully to any use of weapons of mass destruction, including chemical or biological.
So what are you going to be watching for next in this war, given your perspective and your expertise in this realm? Well,
we want to see that we need to see a ceasefire. It's simple. This is a war of attrition. The toll on civilians is atrocious. And so we need to see a negotiated ceasefire as soon as possible and humanitarian corridors to allow life-saving supplies into the populations. We need to keep the pressure on President Putin. This is his war, unprovoked, and only he can back off.
Mr. Weber, thank you very much. I'm not sure that we feel any better having listened to you, but I do appreciate your knowledge in helping us understand what the stakes are and why the negotiations need to continue as a work to bring an end to this. Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Heather.